Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 8th, and we are starting earlier today because I thought I had an important phone call and then I got a confirmation that the important phone call is actually tomorrow. So, yeah, I had already scheduled it. It's kind of stupid on YouTube to change the schedule in any way. It is a great example of just how I'm getting dragged in many different directions, and frankly, it is exhausting me to a new extreme, I think. Inherently, there's just an infinite depth of how tired I suppose I can be, and I have just found a new floor on it. And yeah, so we'll do some warm up and then we'll jump into the video game news. Let's look at the 24-hour peak concurrent charts to see what games people are playing. Crimson Desert, not getting really talked about much anymore, but it is seemingly doing pretty good, to say the least. As far as the warm-up, I'll start talking about Supernatural here in a second because that's basically all I've been doing is a little bit of paperwork, lying in bed watching Supernatural, just being really tired. I did put some silicone in some gaps in my bathroom, and I can say that the best recommended technique there, first of all, is wear gloves. Silicone is really hard to get off when wet, and you do not want any of it on your hands. I don't know how dangerous it really is as a chemical. Arguably, all of those kind of chemical things, until you get to the point where you're dealing with like pure hydrochloric acid in a laboratory, don't immediately cause problems for your average person. They just might cause problems 5 minutes later, or a day later, or they might build up over years and cause problems for either your skin, your lung, your eyes. Obviously, something in your eyes is a big deal, and that's going to be an immediate thing. But yeah, the mess issue on silicone while wet is pretty bad. When it is dried a day or two later, probably really 30 minutes later, it's not too bad. And I tried out some new plastic razor blades I got for a different project, and yeah, if you want a nice straight line and you didn't get a nice straight line using masking tape, painter's tape effectively, which would be what you really would want to do, like that works very well, is just make nice straight lines with masking tape, put the silicone over the masking tape. Once you've gotten it all down wet, pull off the masking tape and you should have a nice straight line there. But this, in one case, was a second attempt for me, and I don't know if you really should be putting silicone on top of silicone, but I did it, considering the handyman I had hired before didn't really do a good job with the silicone. He had used very little and just smashed it into the edges, not really creating a nice curve where water droplets would actually curve away and roll away, but more just creating almost a indent where water droplets would just stay there. So I used a lot more silicone. They come in pretty nice tubes now, where it doesn't seem like you really have to cut the tip off. It doesn't seem like you're using a caulk gun. Obviously, if you're a professional, you're going to be using a caulk gun in much larger tubes, but they have hand squeeze tubes, which is probably the exact amount a do-it-yourselfer would benefit by having around. Um, but yeah, considering how the plastic razor blades are not sharp, and you really have to do something weird to cut yourself on them, because you can really just stick your finger directly on the blades. They did work very well on a softer material like silicone, to just draw a line on the excess and peel off the excess after it's dry, which is way easier to do it there. And so that's been, in the past couple days, my probably only do-it-yourself project. I had another project I was going to start, but man, I think I have hit the wall physically, and honestly I think I'm just going to be exhausted and tired for a long time, which is not really even atypical for me. Now, it may mean, frankly, that I am just done for the rest of the year. It's crazy to say that in April, but it may very well mean that much. That and all this paperwork stuff being a big issue too. The good news is I got the taxes done. It would have been way worse. Here we can see Mugenics has almost fallen all the way off the top 100 chart. Which, yeah, this thing, the power of binding of Isaac Rebirth, also certainly has to do with the amount of updates and new content. It'll be interesting to see if there's ever any new updates or content added from Mugenics. Plus, Mugenics, I think, it just plays very differently than Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac is pretty easy to jump into and play a little bit for an hour or two. While I suspect Mugenics is more of a, you're going to commit 200 hours into it type game. So where am I with Supernatural since this series of live streams over the past few weeks to a month have been me rewatching Supernatural? I am in the, I think, late first half of season 9, maybe even the back half of season 9. It is, I think, in the back half of season 9 that it's Supernatural starts to feel like it's got its footing again. It starts to be somewhat interesting again, but that really only highlights how season 6 up until maybe the back half of season 8, if I'm being generous, really sucks and really doesn't matter. The introduction of the Leviathans led to nothing other than the introduction of the idea of the Leviathan tablet, which then led to the introduction of the demon tablet, which led to nothing, because there is definitely a point where they are just about to shut the gates of hell, and they probably should have at that point. That would have been the bolder move, instead of saving Dean from dying in the process of shutting the gates of hell. That definitely would have been the better move, I think. And you can definitely feel that it feels like the actors are still, or even getting worse about just not like really getting along, and there's just this constant, let's find episodes in which we can do flashbacks, or let's find episodes where the two can be broken up and not in the same scene together. They eventually get to the point where the two characters are not really talking to each other, and they're just keeping it professional when they are in the same scenes and barely speaking to each other. And yeah, there's a real problem, and obviously if you're going to remake Supernatural, you would have would hope to avoid that, but you would probably also just want to have maybe more of an ensemble cast or more of a better idea to establish the idea that they just work different cases. So if it is the case that the two actors kind of hate each other, they don't have to be in too many episodes together. You could very easily have a 13 episode season and then have the two main characters only really shoot for a couple of episodes in which they have to be together and actually working well with each other, which would be like the season finale and maybe the first episode. But yeah, they throughout season 6 to season 9, it is just rehashing the same ideas. Like, it clearly feels like there's just writers who want to promote or push the story in one direction, and they're all fighting each other, and there's no uniform concept. You see that very easily with like Naomi as a bad guy, and probably just a stunt cast of some sort, since it was one of the actresses from Stargate showing up there. And yeah, stunt casting in a sci-fi show on the CW would have been just a lot of people from other sci-fi shows. They had Snooki on there in season 9 showing up as a demon, and yeah, that seems not that obviously is stunt casting, but for a very different type of audience, and perhaps it speaks to the disconnect that happens in that there is somebody at the CW that say, let's put Paris Hilton and Snooki in Supernatural, instead of there being somebody strong and saying, hey, you know what, references to Paris Hilton or Snooki is probably not going to last in the future. Like, you're just not going to really recognize these people, or it's just not going to have that same impact. So maybe we shouldn't do that. There are some episodes that feel like they might be slight references to like Guantanamo Bay and torture, but they don't have anything to say with that, and it's usually just an offhanded joke at most, if there is a point there, because the show definitely went kill crazy. They still using the demon knife like crazy on demons. They are using the angel swords to kill angels, which have now fallen from heaven and been kicked out of heaven, so they have to take vessels, which means when they're killing the angels, they're also killing the humans, assuming the humans are even still alive in there. They didn't make that clear if that was the case. So yeah, that concept has fallen really to the wayside as far as keeping anyone alive, except for Snooki, which they actually did exercise, because obviously they didn't want to kill off the character Snooki, just in case they wanted to use her again. One thing about this is that the CW had Warner Brothers, but they were clearly not given the keys to the kingdom, and they clearly did not have the rights, and I'm fairly certain this was true, to make a TV series based on Harry Potter. Yeah, the most recent HBO Harry Potter TV series, I think, is not CW, or if it is Warner Brothers, yes, it's definitely not CW. If it is Warner Brothers making the TV show, they got the rights much later, and they only had like rights to make the movies. But even at that, you would think maybe CW would have been smarter and shot for something like Harry Potter on their channel, which they never really did anything like that until maybe The Outpost years later. But yeah, also feels like they could have re-aired the movies like once a week. There's I believe 6 Harry Potter movies. So you could easily show one Harry Potter every Saturday, every time, on the CW just to get a bigger audience. Yeah. Instead, they were left with the throwing money at Supernatural. The season I'm looking at would be 2014, 2015 maybe. So we are talking a show or episodes that would have aired about 11 years ago. But so they aren't incredibly dated. There is perhaps a decent amount of change, particularly slightly before Obama was first elected president. There was a pretty big shift towards progressive ideas being considered acceptable enough to be put on TV, and certainly a lot of progressive people in Hollywood pushing more progressive ideas. Supernatural basically does very little of that. There is still just a ton of gay panic jokes, but they are slightly different. Like, there's way worse things certainly in season 8 and season 9, because the gay panic jokes start to kind of stop showing up. The silliness between the brothers tends to evaporate around season 8 and season 9, and so the silliness starts to then get quarantined into its own episodes, such as Charlie showing up and fighting the Wicked Witch from the Wizard of Oz, and them really barely even having a episode with Sam and Dean in it, in favor of trying to have Charlie do a spin-off series where Dorothy, as a now grown adult adventurer, and Charlie, as now a hunter who became way too good at hunting too fast, would go and do a spin-off show. And they never really greenlit that and had that happen. Felicia Day, once again, her ability to get things on TV seemed to be lackluster. She had an agent that was obviously getting her small parts, but it wasn't leading towards actual projects getting started, which in fairness, during that time and nowadays, it is almost impossible to get anything greenlit as a project. It would have probably helped the CW quite a bit if they had made a spin-off show using Wizard of Oz, which Warner Brothers would have had the rights to, although it may have been public domain even then. Or at the very least, they should have done a 6-episode miniseries type project. It is very weird that its Penn and Teller's Fullest is really the best, most long run, most successful show on CW after Supernatural. Just a completely different type of show. But yeah, they start to get deeper and deeper into the Men of Letters stuff. Although they start kind of slow with that. They introduce the bunker, and they actually don't use it as much as you would think. They still are using sets from the hotels an episode later, which eventually I think they stopped doing that, but they do establish that the Men of Letters bunkers is somewhere in the middle of, somewhere in Kansas. I don't know if it's in the middle or not, but yeah, it would be hard certainly to have an episode in like Texas and then have them jump back to the bunker in Kansas and then jump back to Texas. um, without adding some level of magicalness to it, which really would have made sense if they had just thrown that as a concept in there. And the bunker itself is really just a new set. It just kind of replaces Bobby's scrapyard, which, in fairness, they never really said where Bobby's scrapyard was either, or at least I never caught it, and there was plenty of times when they were going back to Bobby's when it really wouldn't have made a lot of sense to go back to Bobby's. But yeah, they kill off Bobby and really kill him off as a character a couple times. And so season 6 to season 9, you feel a lack of that character, and you feel other characters try to replace Bobby. Garth is an example, and terrible attempt. And Kevin, which they kill off Kevin too. So there goes your diversity once again as a character. They definitely have this idea, and certainly if you're going to remake Supernatural, you would connect and merge a bunch of characters to better fulfill this idea that there would be a young Hunter, someone that would be like a little sister to Sam and Dean, that they would sometimes help out and potentially at the end would tragically die. But yeah, they have episodes where there is a character like that, but then they also treat Kevin like that character when he's older. They also treat, I think, yeah, Joe from the first 5 seasons like that. Although the problem with Joe in particular is that they cast Joe as a girl that looks like she's about 17. They treat her like she's about 17, and yet they heavily were implying that there was a level of romance between Dean and Joe, and Dean looked like he was 27 or something. And certainly in those early years, a 10-year difference is a big difference. Now, if Joe was 47 and Dean was 57, nobody's going to bat an eye on a 10-year difference there, depending on when they first met up. But yeah, it's pretty formative years. I would say 17 years old. So they did make a smarter move by having the character, the new kid character, very much be closer to 14 or 15, and Dean as an actor there probably was, if he looked 27 before, he's probably 10 years older now at 37, so they don't go with any kind of romance in that way. Although they are still constantly writing Dean as this ladies' man, and weirdly Sam as being an awkward person who can't get a date if he tried, which I don't really get because both of them are obviously CW Dreamboat characters that look more than physically attractive and seem capable. There's also a thing as you go through this second act where you start to see that computers just start to play a bigger role. People understood what computers were, and hacking as a concept was just talked about more in TV. And so while you would have George, the character, Georgina is her full name, or full fake name, yeah, which they crammed a bunch of backstory around her to try to flesh out her character, like she was going to be a new permanent character. Obviously that didn't happen, but yeah, she was the hacker girl, so you would have thought that you would have always called her on the phone even if she wasn't going to be on the scene, or you would have said you called her to have her do the hacking for you, and it would have had her be more of a specialist type thing. Sam was actually a hacker in the early seasons, But at a certain point, they have Kevin hacking people too, and it's just like everybody except for the meathead Dean apparently has learned massive hacking stuff, and it's not like there's a magical device or a magical spell they're using to hack, although they are using more spells in general, which, yeah, the idea of spells in the supernatural universe is certainly a just convenient plot device, because there's never really any real hard sci-fi type logic to it, or hard fantasy type logic to it, as far as why would there be a spell that could kick angels out of heaven in the first place, or why are spells written in Enochian, the angel language, and which spells are good and acceptable for Sam and Dean to use, and which spells are evil because there's a witch using them. Which, on that point, there's also a bigger question as to, there's a point where the king of demons, Crowley, starts using witchcraft instead of demons and anything demonic to attack people, which doesn't make any sense, because it opens up to this door that gets expanded much further later on in the series, where witches sometimes are way more powerful than the demons. But before, they said that it was the demons that were giving the powers to the witches, and they have been fairly flippant on they have one episode in particular where they're fairly flippant on whether witches are just always going to be bad guys, or whether there can be witches that are not inherently bad guys. So they probably, if you're going to remake the series, should have it be that Wiccans and witches are accepted by hunters as long as they're doing good, and that there's good witches and evil witches. Of course, the Wicked Witch from Oz is a completely different type of witch. And yeah. And so that's a different thing too. And maybe that was part of the reason why they didn't get a spin-off series, although I'm sure it was not really a big reason, in that the magic and how it worked in Oz was obviously going to work very differently, and it wouldn't very much be a case where you had any kind of logic to it. It would just be they can do things because they can do things, because it's a magical land. Yeah. Obviously, well, not so obviously, but if I was going to remake the series, I've said it before, I would have Sam be the magic caster at the beginning. I would have him use magic, and it just being considered acceptable for potentially the first few seasons to use magic until they realize that the magic is actually coming from demons, and then he would give it up, and then you could give a spin-off character that would be your hacker character that would do the hacking that Sam was doing magically before. And yeah, you could start with the characters being much more powerful to start with, and then give reasons why they get weaker and why they need more help in particular. And honestly, that theme of growing a team, I'm not going to say family, because that's what Supernatural talks about, is they use the word family, and has this theme of misusing the word family quite a bit, and it never really meaning anything at all. But yeah, if I was going to remake the series, I would think this is the story of growing the team and bringing more people in, and could be one small theme. It probably wouldn't be the main theme to focus on, Speaking of teams, there is one episode where they take that young girl and show them to be potentially the next generation of hunters, which I suppose that could have been a spin-off show where they just had younger actors, probably 2 young actors, becoming hunters and just supernatural the next generation, which, I mean, they probably should have tried that. When you think about like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, in contrast, at least Buffy the Vampire Slayer had that whole Angel series as a spin-off, and if you mixed in Buffy and Angel together, you probably would get 15 seasons of content. That probably would have worked a lot better too. But that also is probably an example of where Buffy was just a few years, basically a generation in years before Supernatural, and funding would have been a little bit more open and available. Yeah, to the point I'm at, Castiel has come and gone quite a bit. And he's just all around. And there's this brief moment in which there's an angel inside of Sam, and I had misremembered that to be Lucifer. That Lucifer tricked Dean, saying he was a different angel named Ezekiel, and then Lucifer was in Sam's body, and that would have made a lot more sense. That if you were going to remake the series, that would have been the great point to do it, is that the gates of hell are closed by the end of maybe 2 to 3 seasons. That's it for Crowley. You're going to just have to cram all of the Crowleyness that you want to see into those 2 or 3 seasons. Which, yeah, Crowley certainly got a lot more airtime just because I think people like the character and the actor, and same is true for Castiel. But yeah, the gates of hell are closed. Very quickly after that, there's the betrayal from the angel Metatron that casts a spell that kicks all the angels out of heaven. That spell would also kick Lucifer and Michael out of the cage of hell. Or you could eliminate the betrayal of Metatron completely, and you could just say when you close the gates of hell, that kicked the angels out. Regardless, at that point, Sam's body would be dying, and Dean would have to be tricked by Lucifer, claiming to be a different angel, to trick Sam into getting an angel in his body. At which point Lucifer would be revealed for the first time and already in his vessel. Yeah, and that's when Lucifer as a character would be at his big reveal in his true evilness, and the Crowley businessman bureaucrat character would be replaced with a truly scary, truly chaotic character, which is what they're trying to do in Season 8 and Season 9 with Abaddon, which kind of works, but really is not a big enough focus. And that's the biggest problem, I think, with this mid-arc of Supernatural, is that you have really 5 seasons with no focus. It's just like 6 episodes are kind of about this, but 1 to 2 of those episodes of those 6 are also going to be side stories that don't even really matter. I've said it before, all the side stories where they're just hunting monsters basically need to be in a spin-off show. And I guess if you're going to remake the series, maybe that is when you throw in the kids in the next generation, is you just have them hunting monsters and it is just standard Monster of the Week stuff. And yeah, I definitely would get rid of like the Ghost Chasers episodes. Those are more comedy episodes, and in fact, pretty much all the comedy episodes needed to be cut. One of the problems with Supernatural definitely is it was just given too much of a schedule, too much of a budget. If each season, instead of being 22, 23 episodes, had to have been 13 episodes, it would have been much more on the ball, much more important. It really suffers in rewatching. Like, how many people are crazy enough to watch 15 seasons of Supernatural other than me? Without skipping major episodes, without getting bored, without fast forwarding. I would say the numbers are pretty low. That's one of the things I love about anime, is that generally speaking, if you have a manga to start with as the first iteration of your story, you're limited on the number of pages and the amount of time to make each issue. And so you generally don't just drag things out unless you are in Shonen Jump, and then you do tend to drag things out because it's a weekly released chapters type thing. But yeah, most mangas tend to be pretty short. If you want to go longer, you usually do a light novel or a full-on novel, for if you really want to drag things out and not have to animate things. And even if you do have something like Bleach that was in Shonen Jump and had Monster of the Week stuff, there is almost certainly some curation that should happen. I'm not sure it happened with Bleach, where you would take the manga run and curate and remove some arcs, or you would only animate one arc and that would be an entire season. Yeah, in Bleach's case, I think the first release anime of Bleach was actually lengthened because the manga was not finished, and so some of the arcs were actually just filler arcs made up by the animators. As I scroll down the gacha things, I'm still doing the dailies on Pokemon TCG Pocket. One of the major things about Pokemon TCG Pocket that I'm having to do is more around just eliminating bad friends, people that will not jump into the app and not trade cards, because when you initiate one trade you can't initiate another, which they could certainly improve upon that and have 3 trades going at the same time, and that would help quite a bit. But yeah, if you make a trade offer and they don't log in, it takes 3 or 4 days before that trade automatically cancels, and at that point I'm defriending the person. I'm still playing Memento Mori 2. I made some progress in Memento Mori, but it wasn't really that impactful. I got past several levels, but not far enough, really. And it is a case where I just don't think my characters are anywhere close to high enough. They're at like level 360 and they probably need to be closer to level 500 before I saw any significant levels, and the whales are up at like level 700. Yeah. I did see an interesting thing. It did not work on my phone, but I have a weird phone app for watching YouTube, that there was a Memento Mori video in Japanese that said it was auto-dubbed, and I could not find a button to get that auto-dub to play. So when I played the video, all I was hearing was someone speaking in Japanese, which yeah, I do not understand Japanese well enough to be able to understand what they were talking about as far as the specific words and as far as memento mori goes. I only know a small, probably less than 100 words in Japanese that are commonly used. You probably can't pronounce any of them correctly, so yeah. I also heard, speaking of YouTube, that after Coachella, I believe, they're going to let some content creators, but I don't think all, create these live stream channel concepts that effectively would be a playlist that kind of auto curates itself, and so there would just be a fast channel type equivalent on YouTube based on somebody's channel, and that could be extremely helpful if they ever let content creators like me use it, although people may already hate the concept by the time they did let content creators like me use it. But I have over 10 years of content. If I could schedule it fairly nicely where it ran episodes of my old stuff as a live stream, broadcasting the concept, rebroadcasting old video, that would be great. It is definitely an idea and a shift in YouTube where perhaps they are feeling the pinch of the expensive hard drive space themselves, and they want to slow down the amount of new content or the promotion of brand new content on their channels. And it would be the first feature where, if I were to just stop making content for one reason or another, a channel might not inherently die. Which there are plenty of old channels that just don't make new content where that might work for a lot of people and give them the ability to retire or go on and make a different channel and go on and do something else with their life. So yeah, in concept I really like it. In practicality it always depends on how they actually implement things, which, let's be fair, let's be honest here, YouTube usually implements things pretty poorly. They have announced that they're going to shift a new person into one of the YouTube direct communication to creators, which, yeah, these producers get either shifted around, promoted, put in charge of different departments, or just leave Google fairly frequently. And it is a weirdness, certainly, when you have YouTube content creator channels that are being run by YouTube employees, because yeah, those YouTube employees are not really there to become personalities and be hosts for the rest of their life. But it is a smart move that they do it. They were basically forced into doing it, where they would have in the past just wanted to put things out as text blog updates with no face behind it. But yeah, even teaching a few of the producers what it's like to be a content producer, I think helps a little bit on how they think YouTube works versus the reality of how YouTube works. So yeah, I don't really expect too much to change. I suspect that the people above the content producers that show up on the videos are making most of the decisions. The CEO of YouTube probably is making almost all the big decisions from the head down. So yeah, in a lot of cases those videos were just advertisements and not places where feedback was going to be listened to too much. Yeah, I have been super tired, and so still haven't gotten back to playing video games. I've thought about it. Definitely need to schedule more videos coming out on my channel and stuff like that too. I've thought about it, but yeah, haven't gotten anywhere with it. And yeah, the Steam front page is nothing at the moment, and I imagine that will be the case for a while. Goblin cleanup traded very positively. Let's look at that. This is probably some kind of lewd made game. Yeah, there has been a slow increase, I think, in the number of events / sales that have been promoted on the front page. They can be a little bit more cheesecakey, where I feel like a couple years ago it was a heavier hand trying to curate that. But yeah, I don't think that's the case as much now. Alright, well, this is an awkward place to do this, but I'm going to have to pause the recording and take my first break here, so I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So yeah, we've got some interesting new games here for the new and trending. Yeah, I recognize Evo Creo 2, but maybe Tim Swarm. But the rest of these look fairly new. Interesting. Starfield's a top seller. I saw a post while I was taking a break that says the marathon player numbers are falling. So maybe we should see if we can find that and see if there's any truth to that speculation. Frankly, I wouldn't be really surprised if that is the case. There's definitely something weird about that game visually, so yeah, I wouldn't have really bet that it would have had as much success as it even has. Of course, the problem now, if I'm just looking on the front page, if I'm trying to find Marathon, is that that's not going to work. The games that are going to be recommended to me are too different from Marathon. It is interesting to see Starfield being pointed out there. Yeah, I don't think from the front page. I'd have to find a category, which I guess we could do shooters, but that's not even a category being shown here. So they're probably recommending categories to me that I would be most likely to be interested in. Yeah. So yeah, I can't even find Marathon here. So we'll see if there's any news about it. But I also have to point out, because I suspected that because I thought that I was going to have to stream early today to make a phone call later today, I ran this macro at like midnight last night. So even though the suspicion would be because of Easter Monday, which I don't even know what Easter Monday really is as a concept. Like, I don't know what you do on an Easter Monday. I don't know if it's a federal holiday. I don't think it is. I don't know if there is any activity. My thought was that the Wednesday before Easter Sunday was the point where they generally assumed Christ had been crucified and died, and then roughly 3 days later he rose from the cave and resurrected himself on Easter Sunday, which, I mean, Passover in particular would have been celebrated more on the Saturday before Easter Sunday, the Saturday before Easter Sunday, so a week before. So yeah, if you were going to really tell a timeline that really made sense, it would be that Passover actually occurred like 2 or 3 Saturdays before, so that there's just enough time from the Palm Sunday when Jesus would have entered Jerusalem, I believe, and had the Passover dinner, and then been arrested, and then been on trial, and then sent quite a far distance away, like sent to Herod. I don't think Herod was just in Jerusalem, but yeah, it does it does weirdly compact the story the way it is celebrated. I'm sure there's smarter historical theologians out there that could set me straighter on that, but yeah, I have no idea what Easter Monday is. If he resurrected on if you're saying he resurrected on the Sunday, then he pretty much should have done everything on that Sunday and ascended to heaven or walked the earth, or however people interpreted it. But that's just the end of Jesus' story at that point, so I don't know what happens on Monday. It feels like it is just a creeping of holidays, which holiday creep is a real thing. You definitely see it with Christmas, where it just takes up more and more time, and people are talking about Christmas and thinking about Christmas even before Thanksgiving is happening nowadays. And so yeah, Christmas, instead of being December 25th, is really just all of December plus some days. Okay, so this game, Goblin Cleanup, it's very positive overall, but not super positive in the last 30 days. It is also questionable whether there's a single player experience here that I really would want to play. I don't think there really is. So what I'm assuming this is kind of like Viscera Cleanup Crew, in that you have these goblins running around a dungeon environment cleaning up things with just more dangerous elements there, which that does actually put a better spin on it, I would say, than Viscera Cleanup Crew, because now you have like two gameplay mechanics instead of just the one. For better or worse, Viscera Cleanup Crew is just cleaning up. There are several different ways you can clean up, but that is kind of it. Here you have a more traditional action platforming aspect too. They've put a kind of silly theme on it while you're cleaning up. Also, with the platforming, it seems like if you die, you probably respawn, but you probably leave a bloodstain that then has to be cleaned up. So yeah, not a terrible thought of a game. Taking the idea of Viscera Cleanup Crew, which is a game from several years ago, and then putting a twist on it. Whereas Viscera Cleanup Crew is something that can only add a few more levels every now and then. It is in early access though, and that is the reason why it should be on the follow list and not the wish list. Though, don't have any Steam Deck refurbs, no surprise there. Frankly, I've been surprised by the couple of times that there have been Steam Deck refurbs in stock. And frankly, if I was just rolling in cash, I probably would consider getting another refurbed Steam Deck. Wouldn't be a terrible thought, certainly. But honestly, as I'm getting older by the day and getting tireder by the day, I'm starting to just wonder how do I leave anything as far as a plan if I get old and end up in a retirement home or something like that. I'm far too young for something like that, or just end up in the grave. But yeah, it is approaching the point where I don't think a lot of projects that I'd like to get done are going to get done before I pass, and yeah, at some point I need some kind of end of life planning here far as what's going to be done with everything. The truth is, for most people who are much older than me and who should be thinking about this much more than me, is that a significant amount, if not everything, is just going to be estate sold, trashed, thrown away, not cared about. And weirdly, that is probably the best thing you could try and do with your life, is establish friendships or proteges or something like that that could continue the work and establish a shared goal, building the pyramids type stuff, type thinking, instead of just doing it all on your own. Of course, that's really hard, and a lot of people have kids for that selfish reason, and then they very quickly realize kids are not going to be the solution to that desire, if there is any solution to that desire. And I suppose it heavily depends on how many projects and how ambitious you are, and my ambition probably is way too high, and I definitely have way too many projects. I am rambling here, but yeah, that's certainly what I was thinking about yesterday as I laid tired in bed for most of the day. Yeah. Here's the games that people are playing on the Steam Deck. Don't really have anything to say about that. I was watching a YouTube video. I've started watching these YouTube videos where it's usually somebody pretending like they're a detective and trying to guess the ending to mystery TV shows or books. There's like one guy that does TV shows and occasionally movies, and then there's one guy who has done a couple of Agatha Christie books, which, funnily enough, the guy was mispronouncing Hercule Poirot's name as Poirot, which may be intentionally an inside joke there the whole time, but yeah. What they do as YouTube content creators is that they stand in front of a camera with basically a vision board, murder board behind them. It's either drawn pictures on a whiteboard for one guy, the other guy prints out things and points at those printouts of characters for the other guy. And then they hold a microphone in their hand, which the holding a microphone in your hand subgenre of content creators has been around for a long time. It tends to make it feel a little less professional, a little more off the cuff, a little bit more relatable. It allows people to wander around and stand up and gesture. Realistically, you could certainly have a lapel mic, or you could have a boom mic, but the mic being in the shot is its own artistic style. It has become its own artistic style. And that got me thinking, frankly, for as many people who are gaming content creators who just do boring recaps, it is strange how different those boring recaps tend to be. It is almost always either people sitting around the table talking about it, having nothing with them to point to, and then editing in video later, or people on Zoom, for lack of a better word, some kind of video conferencing software, each individual person just talking to the camera and still having nothing to show for it. And a lot of times when people are sitting around the table in the background is very nicely decorated with like memorabilia and toys from video games, but those are just like visual distractions. Of course, the biggest problem with the people who are just recapping the events of video games is that they really don't have any opinions there. And even if I was going to recap events, which is something I'm giving a little bit of thought of doing, which is yet another far too ambitious project as far as recapping games, there's going to be less opportunity for an opinion to be thrown into it if all you're doing is really recapping and not reviewing things. And there is a great argument I have not really had in my mind as far as why would you want to recap versus review at that point. I did also see that the auto dubbing feature into different languages only works for videos that are less than 60 minutes. So how in the world would a live stream work that way? I don't know. As far as pre-recorded videos, for the most part I am trying to keep my videos to be closer to 45 minutes long, even when they are long, but there are plenty of them that go over 60 minutes, so that limitation is inherently a problem that I would hope that they would get rid of. Also, the auto dubbing is almost certainly working off of the content speech detection that YouTube has, which is not particularly good. Amazon Prime Video is really bad about that too. Turn on the subtitles on Amazon Prime Video and just watch for 20 to 40 hours and you will see that very consistently they are creating closed captions either based off of a script that was handed to them where they're saying a completely different thing, phrasing it differently than what is being said, or they're just getting the wrong words. They very often put words together that aren't words, so they're not like running any kind of grammar spell check on what they're detecting. And frankly, I think they use AI, and so that would also explain why they're just throwing in lines of dialogue that don't exist. Like, it's either the case that they are translating the script that was not checked well, or they are hallucinating conversations, because there's plenty of times when they will throw in an entire extra 4 or 5 words that are just not audible, just not being said at all, like they were cut from the whole detection and whole line. Oh yeah, that reminds me, as far as going back to Supernatural just for a brief second here, the whole quest as far as looking for God that was happening in season 5, I believe, that got dropped completely, didn't go anywhere at all, which really hurts. And obviously in the remake you wouldn't have had that quest, particularly since you know that they do find God eventually at like season 14 or 15. But yeah, the whole aspect there feels like that may very well have just been an excuse to keep Castiel away from Sam and Dean, so you didn't have a fully powered angel that could just heal them at any point or save the day at any point. Which, yep, that's a big problem with Castiel too, is that as soon as you introduced him, the power creep factor went way too high. Like, they needed to have severely limited him until basically the last couple episodes of the series. That way he wouldn't have the healing abilities or the teleportation or any of the other magical things he could do or know. A lot of knowledge too there. Yeah. Alright, well, that's going to bring us to the video games news at this point. Which, yeah, if I was going to do hour-long episodes, I would have, at this point, to break up the recording. And I don't know if the auto-dubbing on live streams happens at all, ever. Yeah, even at that, I'm not consistently always around the 1 hour mark when I start video game news. It's kind of close, but it's never consistent. Never going to be that consistent. Okay, Nintendo is taking $20 off the Switch 2 in the US if it's bought with Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Players can either buy the game physically or digitally. I assume the price is the same for Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and they haven't reduced it in any way. I heard someone maybe about a month ago, maybe a few weeks ago, talking about wanting the Switch 2, and I really just thought that was kind of ridiculous. Like, well, I do have some nostalgia and would like to play Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Again, I just don't see a justification in buying a Switch 2 to do it. Yeah. How much is a Switch 2 these days anyways? Is it $300-400 with $20 off? Yeah. I saw a post, I don't know how accurate it is that with that they are claiming inflation in the United States is somewhere around 7.5%. So you are potentially actively making losing money if you aren't making more than 7.5% on every dollar you own. Always. Which, yeah, nobody usually thinks in that perspective, but yeah, if the value of a dollar is going down, you're losing money. The general concept definitely is there, and deflation almost never happens. Yeah, and I think the real buying power of the US dollar and any dollar in the world has gone down a lot more because there's just a lot more that you are expected, and I do mean expected, to own. It is definitely a far different time from, say, the Great Depression, when you really were expected to just own maybe 4 shirts and 2 pairs of overalls and maybe 1 truck amongst a family of 12, working a farm, growing your own food, going to the grocery store and spending maybe $20 if you're buying something really expensive, but probably closer to like $5 for a week's worth of groceries. But yeah, the expectations of cell phones and internet and multiple cars, driving around a lot more, forms of streaming entertainment, generally expected that you have at least one of those and are able to socialize because of that. Lots of people have some kind of smartwatch. Lots of people have multiple computer type things on top of cell phones, whether they're laptops or desktops, gaming consoles, video games, going to the movies way more often, eating out way more often. Yeah, the amount is much, much higher. Well, a lot of those are certainly optional, but they are generally expected to be done every now and then. Even in the United States, dating and going out to bars is decreasing rapidly, and we are having potentially a generation of people like in Japan who are just never going to have been on a date and are never going to get married and have children. And well, that might be good in the long run. It's going to be rough in the short run. Boy, I'm really rambling today. Let's move on to the next article. Xbox has revealed its 18 Game Pass titles for April, including Hades 2, Kiln, and Vampire Crawlers. It is interesting, certainly, that Kiln is just going to be involved with Game Pass, but it probably is the exact kind of game that Game Pass can best benefit, because undoubtedly there would have been very few people that would have remembered Kiln or even heard of Kiln to go out of their way and buy it separately. There's also, I believe, a player versus player game, so it needs as much help as it possibly can be. Although, I don't know how much help it really is getting when you have this many games coming out at the same time. Yeah, Kiln would definitely be my third or fourth choice amongst these games to play. It is definitely not a day one thing. Where if you were really going to support Kiln, you would release it off schedule, just a couple weeks earlier or later, as it's only as a special only premiere of a Game Pass game. Yeah, I think a lot more people will be playing Hades 2. And yeah, maybe Oblivion, maybe DayZ, maybe Call of Duty, maybe the Thermagog. Yeah. Maybe Vampire Crawlers even. Let's see, PlayStation is letting one player win a chance to be scanned and appear in Gran Turismo 7 in its new player base program. The player base is a new community program where players can audition to feature in games. Are they getting paid? Are they getting royalties? Or is this literally just Sony saying, hey, we don't really care about the appearance of characters and we don't want to have to pay any union actors to have their appearance scanned or pay any royalties to it? Yeah. In particular, I don't know why you would want to be in Gran Turismo 7 as a character. I don't imagine you're going to see too many characters in Gran Turismo 7. I don't imagine any of the characters are going to really matter. Which, yeah. I'll also say this art is lazy when you start to think about it. Just doing a horizontal symmetry that inherently is going to point down the eye towards the crotches of the characters is pretty dumb, when you could very easily have done more of a diagonal or zigzag or even a horizontal single line to separate it. But yeah, also, why is this not just like an animated thing? Because that would have been the easiest thing to do, really, is to have this just be, well, even if it was animated, you'd still need a still image. And look at the background too, just a color gradient. This whole concept screams lazy. This whole art screams lazy. Also screams weirdness in that apparently they don't like brown-eyed people or black-eyed people, and that you have two people which seem to pretty obviously have brown eyes, which frankly these two people are not real people, I would suspect either. I suspect they are probably 3D art assets. They don't look like real photos of people. And then they've changed them to be blue-eyed, which is weird, to say the least. Yeah, and if we got really picky, there's even a possibility that accusations at least could be made that this darker skin tone is getting lightened up, but I would suspect it's probably just this matrix effect mixing together on a slow resolution. Yeah. I don't see anything positive here. I don't see why you would want to be in a video game. For years, semi-celebrities, small people, have been in video games. It never really mattered or was that interesting. Even Tony Hawk being in Tony Hawk games barely makes it a better experience versus a random skating game without Tony Hawk in it, and that's when you have a namesake celebrity in it. Maybe sports games really do love sports games players really do love the fact that they have scans of the sports players. I would assume that's probably true, but in contrast, the WWE games have scans of all the wrestlers, and the complaints are much more than the applauses on how well those scans are really done. Of course, it would be really weird to make a WWE game and then have none of these scans of the actual wrestlers in the game. But yeah, this just screams Sony doesn't want to hire union actors or that Sony doesn't know what they're doing, which increasingly I think the new president of Sony Interactive Entertainment is just showing his hand and that he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he is just going back to the way things used to be done with Sony, or just really spinning his wheels and has no ideas at all. Yeah, there's been enough time now to not give him any more grace period, and to really point out that when he entered Sony and took over Sony, bringing it back to Japan being in charge versus Sony of California being in charge, he should have greenlit a whole bunch of projects, and he should have been promoting a whole bunch of projects and really bringing Sony back to being a Japanese product first and foremost, if that's what they wanted to do. Not that the PlayStation is selling particularly well in Japan. And if he was even more revolutionary in his thinking than that, he should have announced a whole bunch of new projects that were not Japanese projects and sold it as a global product, which would have probably been more profitable, but hurt the ego of Sony overall. But he didn't do either. He didn't announce any new games. And as far as I can tell, I don't think there's that many new games being in development for first-party, second-party Sony companies. And I don't think there's a lot of reason why you would bring your game exclusively to the Sony PlayStation. And I don't think there's a lot of reason then to buy a PlayStation in particular versus a PC. Of course, Sony is also not really supporting PC greatly either. Yep. It just may be the case that nowadays it's a lot harder for a company like Sony Interactive Entertainment to go out of business with Sony Electronics supporting them and Sony Pictures supporting them. But it does feel like 10 years from now, Sony PlayStation could just be a division that is shut down. Alright, let's see. Overwatch reveals Anran redesign following player and voice actor backlash. The character has been tweaked to look more sincere and more mature, which I don't perhaps have a great system to determine sincerity in the appearance of somebody. I feel like that is something that you would put into your own interpretation that's not really there. Yeah. This may just be a terrible comparison video because, or picture here, because, well, it seems to me like the character, if this was the exact same character in the same pose, they have somehow stretched the neckline and the bust line to be lower, which mature, if mature means old and old means saggy boobs, that would be kind of weird. I think that's not really the case. I think if you look at the position of this little piece and this piece, that these characters are just in slightly different poses. And so let's ignore that and assume that that's not been changed really at all, because it kind of doesn't really look like too much has been changed below the neck. Then we have to assume it is above the neck. Hair-wise, looks exactly the same. So I don't think they changed anything there either. I'd say the earrings look exactly the same. So the only thing that really looks like it may have changed is that they have made the chin less rounded, which may make it look a little bit more feminine. It feels like the lips might be a little bit more red lipstick on it. A lot of this feels like it's just lighting that's been lightened up overall, where this feels more brownish, this feels more whitish. The eyes come to more of a point and have been less rounded out. That seems like that's where the majority of the work has been done. There. It's really terrible comparison here. It does feel like the angles here are different again, where this cheeks and face feels a little chubbier and this feels a little skinnier. But yeah, I'm not sure that that's a huge difference. And here we have a 1:48 video. Yeah. It does look like the boobs are smaller. I don't know how that means more mature. And the character is just more lightened up overall. But it overall feels very much like they changed very little and are gaslighting people into hoping that they see something slightly different when they barely changed it. Perhaps this is a good example of where if you are going to redesign a character, you perhaps just need to remake the character totally from scratch. Just scrap the entirety of the keyframe concept animation and scrap the outfit and just start over it from a totally different point. This to me screams desperation on Overwatch's. Yeah. I'm not good with faces in general, so maybe there's definitely stuff there that other people are saying, but honestly to me, those faces looked exactly the same. He's saying that the eyebrows, eyes, and mouths have been tweaked to move away from that baby face look and expression to something more sincere and more mature. Which baby face is not sincere? Interesting argument. Generally, I don't look at faces in real humans that much. Babyface may just be a way of saying fatter cheeks, because babies do tend to have pretty fat cheeks. But yeah, I don't think Overwatch is gonna have more success or less success over this change, other than it might be a hint that they are willing to do anything that the audience asks, which also can be a problem, certainly, as far as how it goes. But it also maybe points out that if this is what people are focused on as far as this relaunch of Overwatch 1, which is really Overwatch 2, or 2.5, if this is what people are distracted by and talking about, then maybe people are more willing to play the game and not complain about bigger things. Of course, it is a case that when this actually starts getting played a lot, if it starts getting played a lot, there probably will be a lot more game balance issues that get discussed. Right now, the only thing that can be discussed is character concepts that aren't in the game yet. Moving on, the game was in a Word document. State of Decay 3's 2020 announced trailer was just a concept, the studio head says. An alpha playtest for the game is coming next month. Yep, that is probably true for most games. As it is when you get that first teaser trailer, particularly at big game award events where they have to make a deadline, the game is not in a actual production state or even guaranteed to be fully approved to enter a production state. And very often those teaser trailers are being made by completely different companies and aren't showing anything close to what actually is going to be in the game. I saw DF Retro was discussing a trailer for, I think, the remake of some of the Assassin's Creed games, and they were definitely calling out that Ubisoft has been somewhat notorious for the bullshots, as they call it, where it is just a video cutscene or a trailer that in no way could possibly actually be in the game and proves to not actually be in the game when the game comes out. The number of people in the crowd in Assassin's Creed games have been very often exaggerated. I definitely remember playing one of the early Assassin's Creed games and very noticeably realizing that there was not that many people in the crowd as there really feels like there should be, and that even when there were larger groups of people in the crowd, only the guards really mattered and everybody else was just on a walking loop and wouldn't really play any part. Which that concept of sneaking your way through a crowd probably could be done a lot better nowadays with modern hardware, but still probably wouldn't be that much more interesting as a concept. Nobody is particularly interested in doing that in the real world, is walking through crowds or sneaking through crowds. Let's see. Impossible Mission 3 is coming in May, nearly 40 years after the second game in the iconic UK series. It was a classic Commodore 64 action platformer, which this clearly is a gimmick. I remember playing Impossible Mission 2, or some pirated cloned version of it, on my NES, which it didn't have the Nintendo seal of approval, but it still played. That was a game that drove me crazy. I don't think it's particularly that good of a game. I don't think you can take the concept really and make it a better game either. Because yeah, the idea of going up and down elevators is not that interesting. We are potentially going to get the last Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise, I believe is his name in it. He's pretty old. Of course, you could have guessed that that would have been the case with the last 3 or 4 Mission Impossible movies. After that, I imagine Mission Impossible as a brand will not have anything done with it for a while, and then they'll try and introduce somebody new into it. There's another PC game where you were going through a facility and there was all kinds of robots and stuff, and that was a pretty impossible game too. I don't think it was called Impossible Mission though. But yeah, I mentioned Mission Impossible, not Impossible Mission, because it is kind of weird that that title has not been used to make any kind of video game, at least lately. Of course, the A-Team, Mission Impossible, a lot of those old TV shows, MacGyver, could be rebooted once again for video game forms instead of TV forms. I don't think the A-Team ever was rebooted for TV, but MacGyver was. And Mission Impossible was a TV show before it was the Tom Cruise action movies. But yeah, they Possible Mission series I don't think is really a series that people remember and love. Yeah, I suppose that is when we know that the movie industry will have completely given up. Which, yeah, at some point movie theaters might just go out of business. And there's very few of them, or there's just none of them. And at that point, if movie theaters are out of business, then the movie industry will give up and just try and license all kinds of movies into video games. Which some of them might be good, but a lot of them would be bad. And a lot of them probably would just never get picked up. Nobody's going to make a video game based on Sleepers in Seattle. Or if they are going to make a video game on it, it's probably going to be a visual novel type thing. Which, honestly, that wouldn't be the worst idea, too. If you could get movies to somehow be more appealing in a smaller file size, instead of just having the movie streamed to your phone, there might be something there. I don't know how you could do that though. If anything, what it's going to be is that movies like Sleepless in Seattle could be remade with either AI characters or modern actors being replaced in, and they might have more relevance at that point. But even that seems kind of crazy. I think what will happen more likely is that the movie industry will just collapse, and people will have to admit that most movies are not really worth watching or worth trying to remake or talk about. Moving on, our last Video Games Chronicle article that I opened up for today, so not that much news, is that the beat-em-up pioneer and Double Dragon creator Yoshihisa Kishimoto died at the age of 64. He also created Kunio-kun, which I guess is known as River City series, and directed WWF WrestleFest. We talked about this in the last stream from Komatsu's article. Yeah. Definitely maybe one of the more influential game developers. It's a mean thing to say, but it is fairly true that a lot of people who have died in the game industry up until this point have only been able to work on a couple of games and are just not that impactful or that relevant. A lot of people who have died worked on video games for companies like Atari and then have basically been retired and not worked on games in the past 30 years. It will be a much bigger deal, certainly, when, like, Miyamoto, Mario's creator, or at least the person they say who created Mario, dies. Like, his video gameography will be very, very long as far as what he's credited for. Although he's probably a standout there, because even people who are the same age as Miyamoto really have not been able to be credited anywhere as many games. And yeah, the River City game series has had quite a lot of games come out recently, and perhaps that was in part because this guy knew he was old, and if he had any influence on that at all. And it is a weirdness, certainly, that the way forward River City Girls has been the only River City game that really caught my attention in the whole series, and every other River City game that has come out recently has actually actively lost my attention because they just don't look that interesting. Beat 'em up games are fun every now and then, but they definitely aren't my favorite genre. Moving on to the Gematsu articles. Let's see. Aretha Collection 1993 to 1995 has been announced for the PS4 and 5 and Switch. These definitely, once again, feel like old. Aren't these Master System logos? Nope. I guess this is Super Famicom's logo. So yeah, old, probably only released in Japan type games. I would assume, just by the looks of them, that they are JRPG games. Yeah, they're tagged as JRPG games. I miss this animation style, and it's a shame that there really aren't any animators in Japan that can do this style anymore. This one definitely feels like it is inspired by, I believe his name is Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball. And this style is slightly different than like this style. But yeah, I would love to see the anime genre that is now so big start to go in different directions and kind of separate itself and say, hey, we're going to do a new Record of the Lotus War series, and we're going to do it in this old style. Of course, that would require that the animation software could do something that looked like a hand-drawn style and do it well, which is less likely to be the case. But yeah, that is perhaps a problem that artists out there could speak to, is that the animation software that exists is perhaps funneling and pigeonholing a lot of people into doing very specific styles or different types of styles versus what hand-drawn animation and the influences of something from 1993 that they might be using or being influenced by. Let's see. Moving on, Fuga Melodies of Steel is coming to iOS and Android this summer. It's currently already available for consoles and PC. It does look like a game that's simple enough that it could be on smartphones. This might be a rare example of where there might actually be a decent game released on a mobile phone. The question inherently is how many decent games need to be released on a mobile phone platform before the mobile phone platform itself feels viable as a gaming platform. Whereas I would say at the moment, the only games that are really relevant on cell phones are gacha games, and specifically made for cell phone type games, usually gacha games. The problem certainly is that people don't expect to pay anything up front at all on a mobile phone game, and you're never going to really get a good product if the absolute maximum cost of that game is $0.00 with the expectation that it is going to be loaded with microtransactions. And that's one of the things that Steam potentially could fix, because if it is the idea that you get the game on PC and you get the mobile game at the same time, if you install a Steam store on your cell phone and sideload the app, that is an interesting thought. Of course, the newest version of Android is going to make it harder to sideload things, so very quickly, if Steam was going to try and become a mobile game seller, which they should, they will probably have to sue Google to say, hey, you're giving yourself an unfair advantage here, in which games that are trying to be installed from the Steam client are requiring this extra process that's ridiculous. It is a ridiculous process. It immediately reboots your phone and then starts a 24-hour cooldown timer before you can sideload any app for the first time. But yeah, it would make a lot of sense in my mind if you got the game on Steam, paid $20 to $60 for a game, and if there happens to also be a mobile game version, you get the mobile version. And then if you get it on your phone and buy it on your phone, then you get the PC version for that same price. Of course, so far we haven't really seen any great examples of where the PC version and the mobile version are great. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is fine, and most of them are fine. They work fine enough on cell phones and on PC, but none of them feel like they are absolutely great, and that you get a great, slightly different experience on PC versus mobile. Moving on, ArtDink Game Log. Aquanauts Holiday launches April 23rd in Japan. It's apparently a deep sea exploration adventure game, and that is quite the name, too. Yeah. Well, I was definitely not expecting low polygon images in this trailer. Honestly, this feels like this is just one of those very weird, very lacking in polish Japanese games that we've seen in the past. Yeah, and that's exactly what it looks like too, now that we're seeing actual gameplay. I guess if this was based off of some old game and they're just re-releasing it, I might excuse this level of graphics and lack of stuff really going on the screen. The pop-in is awful. But I suspect that this is just a really low quality game. And I think we are far past the point where just garbage games can be made and sold. Even re-release of old garbage games, I think, no longer makes sense. And yet, I don't mind a secondary gameplay mechanic like this being shown, but that needs to be as good, if not better, than the main gameplay mechanic. Yeah, this is really unimpressive. Enough that I'm not even really interested in watching the rest of the trailer. Let's just move on. Let's see. Kill It With Fire 2 is coming to the Switch on May 7th. Yep. Well, I guess we'll leave it with that. Yeah, I don't even want to put this on the fall list. It is so unimpressive. Maybe I'll make a YouTube short on it, but wait a minute, it's not even going to support English, so no to that. Kill It With Fire 2. Is it still in early access? No. I think that's why it's been on my fall list up until this point. I didn't play the first game. I don't think I'd really play the second game, but whatever. Let's see. Cyberpunk 2077 PS5 Pro update launches April 8th. It is crazy people are still talking about Cyberpunk 2077. Although in fairness, I guess CD Projekt Red doesn't have anything else to be talking about or promoting at the moment. It's funny, I think, very funny, how the feelings and thoughts around Cyberpunk 2077 have like drastically changed, and just the promotion of the game overall has drastically changed. And yet there really is just nobody that I ever heard talking about the main story, or who did talk about the main story, which is perhaps a case also of just them and me doing a really good job of avoiding spoilers, to the point where I have now gone from avoiding spoilers to knowing nothing about a 6-year-old game. 6 years is a bit of a red flag, though, to show that it definitely feels like a game coming out today is in no way going to be more technically advanced than this 6-year-old game. And we probably have just plateaued, at least on the visuals, for what people really want, and probably mostly on the technicals for what people really want in the game. There is perhaps the problem that this is also one of the last more open world games that people really want too, and tastes have just changed. Moving on, the Call of the Elder Gods launches May 12th, which is a sequel to the puzzle adventure game called The Sea, which I wouldn't have known that. Do we want to watch the release trailer, or save time and not? Yeah, these screenshots are definitely not what I was really expecting. single player only. It just hasn't come out yet, I don't think. Yeah. So it doesn't have any reviews. Let's see. Kazuma Kaniko's Tsukiyomi X Devil May Cry 5 collaboration has been announced, which seems weird because this looks like a card game. And they've just crammed Devil May Cry characters into it. So that seems like a very weird collaboration to go with. It feels like a weird card game overall, too. Well, this is that weird dungeon crawler card based mechanic game. Like, pretty sure this game is never going to get any level of popularity and is being shoved out because of who's involved or the publishing company promoting it like crazy. It is crazy anybody's trying to make a dungeon crawling game. Even vampire crawlers. I would say dungeon crawlers as a concept need to be put in the vault for a good 10 years before somebody even begins to think that that is a gameplay mechanic people should like or would want to actually play. They've never been that popular, and it just screams a level of laziness. Frankly, it's more lazy to make a dungeon crawler than it is to make an RPG Maker game. I guess maybe it's just easier to dismiss all dungeon crawlers than it is to dismiss all RPG games. Moving on, Absalom is coming to the Switch 2. Physical edition includes a full game on card. Okay, that's good to know. Absalom is rated very positively on Steam. Okay. See, this might very well be more of a beat-em-up game of modern times. Which, yeah, I think a lot more actually goes on with modern beat-em-up games compared to old arcade beat-em-up games where all you're doing is mashing buttons and beating people up. You tend not to have health and magic and items and things like that in an old school beat-em-up. Let's see, Parasol Superstars launches April 14th. This feels like yet another either really old game or Japanese only game or both. I would say both. Looking at the screenshot there. See if we can. This is only a minute long. I think people really need to come to reality when it comes to these old arcade style games, because these games were being made in an era when nobody knew what video games were really going to be. Nobody really had any expectations for video games, and there was severe limitations on what you could do with the hardware. And as such, these old arcade games are cups with holes in the bottom of them, for lack of a better description. They are so incredibly flawed that if there is no nostalgia around it, which I have no nostalgia around Parasol Superstars, there is no reason you would ever even entertain playing the games. I think the same is probably something you can say with a lot of old board games. Monopoly, for some crazy reason, is still around, despite being a hugely flawed board game. But maybe that is more of a matter of time. Solitaire, there's been thousands upon thousands of different variants of Solitaire, but very noticeably, only 3 or 4 variants of solitaire are very popular, and poker, similarly, is lots and lots of variants of poker, but only 2 or 3 are actually very popular and frequently played. The Gothic Remake digital pre-orders are now available, including Gothic Classic as a free bonus on consoles. I wonder if that means you can get Gothic Classic for free on Steam, or if you have to pre-order. Of course, we haven't even had a lot of people push the idea of pre-orders. There's Gothic 1 for $20 being promoted. Yeah, we have enjoyed the fact that there has not been a lot of pushing of pre-ordering lately. It has just kind of quietly died down as much as it is going to die down. People still offer it as an option, but the idea of pre-ordering something and you have to play it day one has, I think, drained up. This is a THQ Nordic published game, so this may very well also be an example of THQ Nordic needing money and Embracer Group needing money. Gothic Remake definitely feels like it was the game slightly before Skyrim that nobody, or severely fewer people played. And there definitely feels like there's an alternate universe where Gothic was played a lot more and Skyrim either never came out or was just not as popular. And in that alternate universe, that may have been for the better, because had there not been so much focus on Skyrim, then we probably would have gotten more variety of fantasy games and just more fantasy games in general. Skyrim almost killed the entire genre just by being overly popular. Moving on, Industria 2 launches April 15th. Let's look at the Steam page. What is this? An action first-person shooter, narrative first-person shooter. Woman stranded in a parallel dimension. Okay. Well, I totally missed this, which makes me wonder about Industria 1. May very well be the case that I didn't put it on my fall list because I was assuming I would want to play Industria 1 first, which that's kind of a bad system to go with. Yeah. Visuals look different in the second game, obviously, but nothing looks terrible here. It is potentially just on the cusp of something that I might want to keep on my wish list, but yeah, I have not really committed to the idea of going back and just removing things that were below 75% positive. But yeah, that is something I'm thinking about doing, although this would be a great example as to why to not do that, or why to treat each thing that is at that level of middle tier quality on a case-by-case basis, because some kind of adventure first-person shooter game sounds better and more interesting to me than a non-adventure first-person shooter, and having a sequel to the series does encourage me to want to play the series a little bit more. So yeah, Here's the same story we talked about, Sony Interactive Entertainment announcing the player-based program to scan players into PlayStation games. It feels to me, oh, and this seems to be the way you're really going to be scanned. They're going to take a photo of you, a 2D photo of you, and put you in it. Seems to me like if you were going to introduce a system like this, it wouldn't just be one lucky winner. It would be the ability to put your own likeness in games always. Which that would be a completely different conversation, certainly, if there was a case that you could just scan a 3D model and anything running on the Unreal Engine or the Unity engine or the Godot engine could replace a character's model with that 3D model. That would be interesting for the narcissists who want to see themselves in games, and very quickly it would also be a case where you wouldn't be replacing your likeness in a game with you would be replacing other characters with like famous celebrity models or just made up models of your own, and effectively you would just be modding the game on a very easy way. That was kind of what the Miis from the Nintendo Wii were supposed to be, but in an effort to make it actually work on the Wii and make it kid friendly, what you made as a Mii never really looked like any human being. Which, yeah, the idea of having custom models for all games is an intriguing idea in particular. But the reason why Sony in particular, as a Japanese company that wants control, would not allow for a system like this, and this would more likely have to be an open standard used by at least Unreal Engine, is that no game developer and no game publisher wants it to be super easy for you to make a live stream where you have a character dressed up and looking like Hitler, or not dressed up in anything at all, and then you're putting up footage on the internet somewhere that looks like, look at this concept of, or look at this character that's in this game, when that character actually isn't in the game. This is effectively, if you do introduce that concept and that idea, you are opening the door to yet another hot coffee type incident where while some of the content in the hot coffee incident was in the base game of GTA, to access it you had to actually mod it, and in the modding I think you may very well have been adding some content too. I don't actually think you were, but yeah. So they left effectively some cut content that was in the game and made it impossible to reach when they needed to have scrubbed it. Regardless, though, it was just a matter of time before the news of that era attacked video games, and there was a hot coffee hysteria that would occur. And even beyond hot coffee concerns, there is also the just disconnectedness concern. As far as Gran Turismo, the bigger concern is it's a racing game, and yet if we look at this, it's got credits, which are concerning. It's got some kind of icon I don't recognize. It's got points, and it's got a daily workout, which seems like dailies, and then a clock, which put all that together, and that screams dailies and microtransactions and currents and credits, and I just don't think any of that should be in Gran Turismo. So that is concerning. Gamatsu has the Game Pass games coming out in April. Again, as I said, far too many games all at once. That is an issue, to say the least. Yeah, I was talking about in the previous stream how I'd done just the initial kind of surface research on what the scientists say as far as relationships and 200 to 300 hours of interactions before somebody is considered a friend. And that got me thinking that, yeah, YouTube probably should do something like that, where you could reward people who watch a certain amount of hours on your channel. That being said, I can immediately see why YouTube wouldn't do that, because the last thing you want to do is skew your results from being natural results of people actually being interested in videos to people just watching videos to unlock some kind of emoji or something that they could put next to their name as a true fan of the channel. And yeah, I don't have statistics as far as individuals. They don't give us statistics as far as individuals watching a certain number of hours on your channel, so you couldn't really go outside of that and reward people for watching 200 or 300 hours. Even at that though, 200 or 300 hours is still a lot. Like 200 hours is basically going to church every week for a year for 2 hours. It is 52 weeks, 2 hours, multiply that, you get 104 hours. So it's not even a year, it's 2 years to get to 200, and it would be 3 years before you get to 300. So yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot of time and commitment that you would have to commit to. And as I'm thinking about having movie nights, yeah, I'm thinking that Saturday night, Sunday nights probably are the right time, and potentially just like every weekend doing something. My thought there is perhaps the more family-friendly stuff is something that would happen in the evening on Saturday, and then the less family-friendly stuff would happen on Sunday, because anybody who's willing to skip church is going to be less upset about family-friendly stuff or non-family friendly stuff being shown. So yeah, of course you could also see just like entire marathons happening between it, just up all night on Saturday. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, and it's certainly, as a hosting commitment, a ridiculous thought to do Saturdays and Sundays. But yeah, those probably are the right days. Anytime during the week is less likely to have people show up. Yeah, as far as my example of like Escaflowne the movie, I could see doing a slightly more family-friendly live-action movie, then doing Escaflowne the movie on a Saturday, then potentially a marathon of episodes on Sunday. But honestly, it would have to probably be a 3-day weekend, because 26 potentially hour-long episodes on Sunday would not be, there aren't enough hours in the day, even if it was a 24-hour marathon from midnight to midnight. So yeah, that concept starts to fall apart again as far as how do you air an entire TV series to a group like that. Yeah. Maybe you just don't. Maybe there is no solution. That is always a possibility that irks me the most when thinking about things, is that there may very well just be no solution. Anyways, I'm rambling. Back to the video game news. Drop Duchy Complete Edition for the PS5 and Switch launches April 21st. This feels like this is a building game. Let's look at the Steam page. Like a village management game. I wasn't expecting cards to play a role. It is rated very positively. I do also have to applaud the concept of using duchy instead of king or knight, phrases that are used more. I am also realizing that this is half Tetris too, in that when you're in this gameplay mechanic, you are seemingly trying to connect things, although maybe it isn't just a line straight across. And these cards in particular may be things you select in between the Tetris sections. Yeah, and it seems like there's a conflict that goes on as far as potentially trying to get rid of these grayed out sections. So it might very well be two-player Tetris of some sort. Yeah, that does seem interesting. Let's see. Silent Hill Townfall has been composed by a Canadian musician, Pilot Priest. The original track Home has been released. I've never heard of Pilot Priest, but then again, I don't know anything about music. That is certainly something I could be better with, but probably never will get better with. Overall, though, I just don't think this is an announcement that would interest me, but it does highlight a more Japanese style of announcements, and that they're going to make a whole bunch of little announcements around the game and try and promote it more compared to Silent Hill F, which I don't think got promoted too much. I'm not sure if you can hear this, but there is a hugely loud motor outside my house that just came on. I assume it's somebody's car and not a generator, because I don't think anybody has a generator. There, it drove off. Thank goodness, but yeah, that would have been really distracting. Yeah. Silent Hill Townfall, so far for what is shown, looks like a fine horror game. I don't know if it really should be called a Silent Hill game. I think there is a real danger that Konami is just going to license the phrase Silent Hill to anyone and everyone, to the point where what people think of Silent Hill is that it means horror game and nothing else. And that is going to particularly irk the old school Silent Hill fans who want to really just see remakes of Silent Hill 1 and 3, maybe. Perhaps this idea of Silent Hill just meaning horror game would have worked a lot better if Silent Hill F hadn't been just such a weird Fatal Frame clone and Japanese mythology based more than it really should be, because I would say iconically Silent Hill has been more around its own unique weird visuals and more Western visuals than a fox creature or creepy Japanese skull girls attacking you. Moving on, Shikondo Blue Pieta details its prologue and systems. If you want to check that out, there is a lot of text here. It's a side-scrolling shooter. Faith the Unholy Trinity is coming to the PS5 on April 9th. I believe these games are already on Steam. Yeah, overwhelmingly positive. Despite its low visuals, I would have to assume that there's a lot of good game here to make up for its visual style. This doesn't feel like it's particularly that old of a game, too. Yeah, it's only 4 years old. Let's see. Frostpunk is coming to Switch. All the exciting gameplay and moral tension on the go. Okay. Frostpunk 2 DLC Breach of Trust has been announced. Yep. Okay. Yeah, the city management concept of a frozen city, or city that's always at risk of freezing, is an interesting twist on a story and a narrative, but it's still built around a city builder, and lost my attention because of that. And then Furu has trademarked Cry-Me Light, or maybe Crime Light in Japan, the next Cry game following Crystar and Cry Machina. Okay. And that's it for Gamatsu. Remember, I ran my macro at like midnight, so there was a decent 12 hours in which more news might come out, and the time zones for a lot of these editors may be very different than my time zone, so Gaming on Linux has only one story for us to even look at today. Well, no, it doesn't even have one story, because that's Frostpunk 2. So that then takes us to GameDeveloper.com. May very well be that there just isn't any Linux news at the moment either. So, Blizzard explains visual updates to Overwatch's Aaron. Blizzard shows the visual makeover of Aaron following community backlash earlier this year. So, yeah. Now, this is weird, because this picture seems like it's the exact same picture that we saw before, except for they cropped the picture before on Video Games Chronicle to not go as far down. But there's a difference here, too, and it's not the same picture. I'm pretty sure it's not the same picture, because the bust size and the different angle here makes it feel like that's been increased. But they don't talk about that. In fact, all they're really talking about, they focused on the eyes, eyebrows, and mouth, and a more confident pose. So yeah, that you can see that the pose seems to be slightly different. This is perhaps the best way to potentially do something like this, is to just have arrows pointing. Raise right eyebrow to look more confident with a smirk. Darker shading and freckles. They define the cheek and jawline with slightly wider smile and mouth. Yeah. They're saying they define the cheek and jawline, which basically means they made it sharper and skinnier looking. Gave a more focused look to her eyes, which means they just kind of lowered the upper eyelids so it's not so open. Is this really article worthy? I have to ask. And yeah, I guess since the backlash made news, the response to the backlash is technically news, but boy does it feel irrelevant to talk about something like this overall, and definitely feels particularly irrelevant because the backlash was not like a long-running, long-lasting backlash. Yeah. Well, I do have to applaud game developer for putting in the extra effort. I don't believe this is just pictures from the press packet. So Sony is going to acquire the machine learning company Cinemaverse Labs. I thought that had already been announced, but maybe not. Yeah. Still some people investing in machine learning and all of that nonsense. The obituary for the Double Dragon creator Yoshihisa Kishimoto, who passed away at age 64. This is one of those examples where I think GameDeveloper.com in particular should be able to put a longer article out for an obituary and put some more effort into it and have more things to say. But it may very well be the case that GameDeveloper.com, as a site that also kind of encourages developers to use it like LinkedIn and put their profiles and all of that, just really hasn't gotten much of a Japanese audience or allowed a fan wiki where people could list the credits. That was one of the many projects that hit my head and then I immediately forget about, was the idea of an open credits Wikipedia type website where we could have fans and or people who actually work at the industry in the industry list their credits and have a LinkedIn specifically for game developers and specifically include credits for people that have been excluded from the credits of a video game, because it is notoriously the case that if you leave a company on bad terms, or if they make a remake, or if the company just hates you in general, you won't be credited in the game. Or if you leave the company before the game is released, you won't be credited for the game. And that is a ridiculously unfair and untruthful standard, whereas anyone who worked for even a fraction of a second on the game should be credited. Of course, that would make really, really long credits in video games, but that's a problem that could easily be solved by scrolling the credits faster. But yeah, that also was a website idea that would require a lot of maintaining and would not be the best use of my time. Let's see. Here's one of those stories. Former Halo Studios art director and other employees accused the studio of harassment and retaliation. Longtime Halo artist Glenn Israel and other former Halo Studio workers say the company covered up harassment and bullying in the workplace. Harassment and bullying in the workplace happens a lot. It's a very hard job that all people in charge, all management have to try and eliminate that on a moral stance, and many management turns out to be the harassers and bulliers. Union jobs in particular, harassing and bullying people into quitting is often a standard method of operating. It is interesting that this post is being put on LinkedIn, considering Microsoft owns LinkedIn and the Halo Studio is also owned by Microsoft, I believe. Of course, if they're going public with this, instead of going for a lawsuit, and they're not afraid of Microsoft suing them for slander, then I would have to assume that the accusations are fairly accurate. It would certainly be an explanation as to the problems with the Halo companies and the Halo games in general. It is super unsurprising because Halo as a game feels like it was uniquely designed to target and create the gamer bro style of gamers. And when I think gamer bros, I do kind of think of a lot of people who would have been bullies when they were in school or younger and may very well still be bullies. And yeah, when Halo is mostly popular for people playing against each other, the idea of trash talking and harassing players and targeting them and killing them is just built into the whole system there. Halo is definitely not a game that could be sanitized or cleaned for a more sportsman-like, fair play, everybody having fun type experience that is often the goal nowadays when you have player versus player. Of course, that goal is far from ever actually accomplished, and instead you just have a lot of people getting banned for voice chat and things like that while playing with their friends. So yeah, knowing the gamer bro community, or as I suspect I kind of know them, stereotyping the gamer bro community really, I am not surprised that you would have that same kind of gamer bro type community in the workplace. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if we also have similar stories come out for companies like Gearbox more in the past than nowadays. And certainly those accusations have been, similar accusations at least, have been levied against the CEO of Gearbox, but Randy Pitchford. But yeah, I don't know if the Gearbox of today has those problems as much. And yeah, maybe there is something to be said that that level of naked aggression really needs to exist, but needs to be very carefully isolated and funneled into the game development and not in the workplace. Of course, it is also totally worth pointing out that game developers are treated rather nicely and paid rather well. So I don't want to completely belittle their legitimate complaints, if they are legitimate complaints, but I also want to point out that there's plenty of harassment and bullying happening on Walmart workers and McDonald's workers, and they could post articles on LinkedIn till they're blue in the face, and nobody is going to care about that. Alright, well, that brings us to all the new games on Steam. Again, because I ran my macro, there might be fewer games to look at today, and there may just be a ton of games that come out on Friday, and a ton of news articles from on Friday. Which, yeah. And today is probably going to be another day where I just go to sleep after the end of today. Like, I really am so tired. Of course, it may not be the best thing to do, but that may very well be what happens. Rigid Gems Museum, there might be something here. Alright, so let me explain what I'm doing here, since I didn't explain it. If I find something interesting, I will put it on the follow list. If I find something just somewhat worthy of a YouTube short, I won't click the follow button, but I'll swipe this way to leave the tab open to go through at least the pretense of making YouTube shorts. And then if I find something not worth my time or worth anyone else's time, I will swipe down, which closes the tab. These are all gestures that are programmed via an extension because it is way faster to swipe down than it is to go all the way to the top of the screen and click the X button on the tab, or go all the way up to click on the tab to the right of it to leave it open. Eventually, in some fictional future in which I actually get things done, I will just have buttons here, and I'll just be clicking the buttons and actions will be taken. In general, they will just be a close button, a YouTube short button, and a follow button. And the follow button will be different than this follow button, and probably separate, because that follow button will add it to the following list and move to the next one. It's black hole fishing. I don't know about it, but the name is intriguing. Visuals look intriguing enough. Archimedes. That's another thing they really screwed up with Supernatural, is that they bring in like Odin, no, not Odin, Zeus, and some of the Greek gods that they didn't kill off in the first 5 seasons. And yeah, it definitely is just kind of like this monster of the week concept that doesn't interconnect in any way. If they did close the gates of hell in Supernatural, that would have been the point where the demons would have gone away and you would have introduced all of the old god type concepts. Zeus, Archimedes, no, Artemis, not Archimedes, Kali, Ganesh. They could have all come out of the woodwork, and that could have been an entire season or 2. It would have worked very well with the power creep. Yeah, that would have almost certainly made a better season 6 through season 10. So if all the angel stuff was paused and not talked about, and it was just old gods and new monsters and maybe alphas. Does this one support English? Nope. Yeah, if I just sat down and did any programming for half a second and closed tabs that didn't have English language support, that alone would save me several seconds each stream. Yeah. This is a WayForward game. WayForward, known for loving to put their characters in provocative angles and lewd clothing, their female characters at least, but also kind of known for making old Game Boy style type games. Yeah, so you can see how there is a fairly significant difference between what is on the screen and the side art banner. Yeah, if this was an old game, it probably would have some nostalgia for it, but way forward games in general tend to have a fandom in that the Shantae series, which they're most known by, is fairly popular. I still haven't, well, this looks like a lot of stuff, but I wonder if there's AI art in this. No, it doesn't claim it. So it looks like it's a daughter raising simulator, but it's also not rated very positively, and I can kind of see why. It looks like a mess. Looks like there's just way too much going on, even for a daughter raising simulator game. Yeah, I lost my train of thought there. I was talking about Shantae for a brief second there, and then got distracted. Personally, I don't feel like old Game Boy style games in that same style is particularly appealing, but I do like the newer Shantae games and how they take that 2D platformer concept and expand it to make more sense when playing on a modern monitor with higher resolution and way more power. A lot of old platformers struggle to adapt themselves well, because they kind of just zoom in on the pixeliness, and that does not really work. And still have a ton of games coming out. Things are not changing. Oh yeah, that was the other thing that I've still not found what would be the game to have if you were going to try and do a rock band, or in this case I think this is actually something that feels like for a second that it would be a singing game, but it's not actually a singing game, it's just an RPG game. Yeah, a karaoke game in particular becomes more difficult because the music rights on that crazy. It is kind of crazy that there isn't something with Spotify where you can just karaoke mode, and that Spotify would have AI text, speech to text already set up and going. Yeah. Yeah, Rock Band probably is the more popular thing. I will say too that that's getting a little crazy as far as if I was going to have a movie night and video game nights and then also have karaoke. It's just like too many ideas and not focusing in on one, and particularly karaoke is not something I'm actually interested in. it almost feels like I'm thinking on the scale of like a convention, a fan convention, where you would just have multiple events happening at a venue. And that is way too big of a scale to be thinking. Yeah. Yeah, we have an RPG Maker game, but at the very least, we haven't been seeing a ton of those. I think it took years, but we finally have hit a point where anything that looks like an RPG Maker just is not being made in those vast numbers that they once were being made. Of course, that may also have a lot to do with just like tariffs on, not tariffs, but actual blockades, digital blockades on doing business with Russian companies who may have been the groups of companies, if not the same company, making all those RPG Maker games. But I would also hope that it is perhaps just a case too that game developers, the low effort game developers, have given up, and new game developers are realizing that you can't just use something like Game Maker or RPG Maker to make a simple game that does not stand out amongst other people. You have to actually put a lot more creativity and a lot more work into it, and RPG Maker games in particular screamed a lack of creativity. They were all just using the same assets and telling the same kind of fantasy stories. It's not like I ever saw a single one of them that were described as being really good with their writing. Which, in fairness, even if the writing was incredibly good, most people probably wouldn't have given them the time of day for people to know that. Which is a great example of you have to be able to sell your product even if your product is good, and putting it in a asset flip RPG Maker type game is a great way to not sell your game. We are still seeing clicker games, we are still seeing desktop pets, we're still seeing a lot of other games that just don't meet a high level of quality, but we are, I feel like, in a much better position now because there's just more variety. Here you have an example of a demo being removed from a store, which does not make sense, which makes me suspect that the demo was really a beta for the game, and you should never remove anything from anybody, because that is a great way to piss people off. I'm scrolling down this file list just to see if anything else catches my attention. Seeing a decent number of games that are out now. One thing about today's stream that's been weird too is that I've had like a breakfast / lunch of cooked chicken just sitting next to me, smelling it the whole time, and I must not be very hungry at all because that did not affect me, and normally that would be something that I think would affect me. If you already download the demo, you get to keep it, they say. If the installed demo will not disappear and remain launchable. I guess the question is, will you be able to re-download the demo, or do you have to leave it installed? The reason they're taking it, as this is our first launching of a game on Steam, we are unfamiliar with the distribution mechanism, which led to a configuration error. The demo was set to be a standalone application instead of a proper trial version attached to the main game. This is not how a demo should function on Steam, so maybe Steam told them to remove it. To correct this configuration issue, we've contacted the Steam team and requested the demo be removed from the store. Which, yeah, to me that feels like what they're saying is that the demo is not anywhere the same code as what the full game is. That it's a completely different thing and potentially has gameplay mechanics and elements that are not in the final game. Now here's an issue, I think. This game has been available for sale for 6 years. Its release date says 2020, and it has no user reviews at all. Which also just says that the game is completely relevant. When looking at the screenshots here, yeah, there's nothing particularly too impressive here. So I am going to take this off my follow list and help clean up my follow list a little bit. But yeah, it does feel like that there's this pitfall you can certainly do with demos in games in general, in that you make something and then that demo gets shown off and then you change your main game completely and there's just no code and no gameplay mechanics in the final product that are also in the demo, and that's not really what a demo should be. A demo should be demonstrating what is actually in the game, and Steam does not have any other labels to release other things, as far as if you were trying to do like a vertical slice. That typically is still how a demo should be, or if you were trying to do a trailer type thing that would show off concepts, that those really should just be in press releases and not released as a demo of the software. Inherently, Steam does not want the scenario where somebody buys the demo or gets the demo for free, plays it, likes the game, and then buys the game. That is a mistake, because if they buy the game and that game is completely different and they don't like it, then you're going to get more refunds because of a dishonest demo, which is really the issue here. My other concern certainly here, though, is that they might just be removing the demo. This seems pretty obviously a Chinese developer, in the hopes that it actually forces people to actually buy the game and play the game. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of negative reviews in Chinese, although a decent lot of positive ones too. But yeah, these are all received for free, and even received for free, there's way more negatives than you would expect. Yeah, you gotta be real careful about making dishonest demos when developing a game. Basically, it means you shouldn't be making a demo for your game until you are probably close to having a gold master of your game, which is really close to its launch point. At the very least, you need to be feature locked outside of the alpha stage before you start to think about making a demo of your game. And that's where you get a scenario. In some games, you don't see it too often, and it's not a problem too often, where the demo is just like the first chapter, and the first chapter of any game tends to have the least amount of features and the least amount of abilities and gameplay in it. And it is where you sometimes get the scenario where the first chapter of a game just feels worse than the last chapter of a game. Although they tend not to do that too much because they want to really hook you with that first chapter also. So yeah, a lot of times demos might be in the middle or even close to the end, probably not the actual last chapter of a game, where the game can drag and be worse. That would be, I guess, the best place to excise a demo from is when you are somewhere near the end or in the middle of the game. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. Despite not really even having that much news, I still managed to ramble and take this to 3 hours, so that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.